trying to see how loud my PS4 is in this mic. Okay. I just stalled this too. Damn. My PS4 is loud. Oh my god. It's creating an echo with me, like, having it open. Okay, let me close that then. That was ugly. That echo was nasty as hell. Okay. Holding. I don't know if that makes sense. So like, if I'm coming around like this, or also it's 2J swaps, not the original motor. You see how it's like kind of swinging a little too far? Like, it gets stuck. It starts gripping forward. Third to fourth is what she typically see, the angle is way too short. So I'm gonna go here. Let's see this. Oh, this is a first gen FRS LSD, manual transmission LSD, like final drive, all the ratios, gear ratios. I have it tuned to that. It could be the coast lock that's like messing it up, low key, or the power lock. What was your original power lock at? 60? What did you say? Hang on. The 2JZ is the motor that I have. Wait, I scrolled away. I'm on clutch based limited. I could do viscous low key instead, but then I'd lose the ability for coast lock, which helps with your like handbrake turns or your handbrake entries, because then you could just glide much further without having to do too much extra ish. You just clutch in, handbrake, hold angle, and then you like basically throttle blip and then get back on the gas. With this here, this power lock, I think, hang on, let me just bump this shit up all the way to see what happens. Yeah. Oh, straight launch. See that angle? See how nasty that is? How like you can't stay too far on the outside due to that. And then it starts, yeah, it starts kicking. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that is interesting. Okay, so I figured it out. Power lock is just like how locked up you want the diff, basically. Yeah, that makes sense. Preload is how much, yeah, how much preload level is setting. Okay. Acceleration blocking ratio. Yeah. Because at 100%, it just accelerates right off the bat. Whereas, I'm pretty sure if I had it at 0, it would basically just function as like an open diff. Crazy on the left side. Okay. Go back here. I'm gonna slap that shit at like a 72. That sounds like a crispy number, so we're gonna keep it there. Don't ask why. Because it is really so. I think 8100. I could really keep bump the gears since I have longer gears, or not longer gears, but I feel like it's not even at 8100. I'm tweaking. Okay, we're gonna squeeze a little more power out of it by bumping up the rev limiter. And then what we're gonna do with that is, because I keep gripping and what was that, like I kept gripping in like 7,000 RPM. So in 4th gear, so I would need to, or I'm not building enough boost actually. So what I could do is I could go like this. So here's a trick. No, don't cancel. I don't know if you're still watching, but pay attention. Pay attention. Okay. Watch this. So, know how I said it was gripping in the 7,000 RPM, right? Around 7,000, like 7,500-ish, like in 4th gear. So what you could do instead, for the torque to be a little bit better, you could go here and bump up the turbo pressure a little. See how the torque rose and the power rose? You want the power and the torque to be a little bit closer. So after you bump that up, you're gonna drop the torque actually, because that'll drop the horsepower more so. You're just gonna keep going back until you find the closest that you could get with the horsepower to your torque. Because you're like, realistically, like if your torque, or if your horsepower is like over a certain amount and your air pressure is not equaling, like, I don't know how to explain this. How do I explain it? Because that just sounded so fucking stupid. Like, basically, it's not you're not, like, you know how, like, horsepower, crank power, you know, like, wheel horsepower, like, basically just that. Like, it's not going to equate. So, a good tune is going to keep your torque and your horsepower close, with at least within, like, the 300-ish kind of, you know, yeah, basically. Um, so, yeah, I'm gonna keep bumping this down, because we were at, what, 620 something earlier, and we're at 462 torque. So we're gonna keep going down with the max torque overall, and we're gonna try and meet it really close and get it within, like, that 200 or, like, that 150, 160-ish range between each other. Is what I'm really looking for. And the reason that I bumped this up is so that way I could, the rev limiter is so that way I could see how much, like, more power I could actually get out of it before I started making this adjustment, because then I would be stuck down here, like at the lower one, and then if I started bumping it up, I would have to retune it all over again, because it would, like, the air pressure and all that, it would get all, like, fucky again, basically. So it's easier to tune at your rev limiter at the highest and then drop it, versus tuning at the lowest rev limiter and then bumping it up, if that makes sense. Because, like, you're going to be a little more cautious at the top of the rev limiter as well when it comes to tuning, and then it just makes it easier to bring it down and bring it down and bring it down till you have a really good one where it's not like it's sending your fucking wheels flying, you're sending yourself into the goddamn wall or something. Because, you know, that, I mean, there's tunes like that. I mean, you see this shit all the time. Mustangs, cough. But yeah, so I'm gonna take this down to, like, 550, 150. That's too low. Actually, that 599 right there is looking kind of crispy. Nope, nope. I want the top of 599, but I don't want to be all the way at the top, if that makes sense. Because what I'm looking for is, the way that I play is I like to clutch kick, but with the 2J, you can kind of get, like, a, what's it called? Like you could kind of use, like, the clutch as, like, an anti-lag on the 2J in this game. So if you're, like, holding the RPMs at a certain, I'll just show you. So if you're, like, holding it at a certain RPM and then you clutch kick, it'll basically, like, turn it into a fucking anti-lag, and then the second that you start shifting, like, if you shift again, it'll just, the amount of boost is ridiculous. But yeah, watch this. I'll show you. I just wanted to see what that would look like. I'm keeping this at 72 preload. What is the original preload at? 60? And I had it at 72. 76, some shit like that. 76. 60. I don't want that much preload on it. That's crazy. I do want the preload a little bit higher though, just so that way it can handle, like, when I clutch kick. So maybe 80 low key. I accidentally did standard. Oh wait, I do need sequential. I'm tweaking. That's probably another reason why. Let me go up a little bit more. Yep. Brakes, keep those wheels, they're 18s. I'm not running staggered. I could go a little skinnier with the tire width up front, and then a little bit thicker. No, that's eating the fucking tire wall. That's crazy. I'm not gonna do it. I'm gonna keep the 255s, or we could go 260. a little lower on the PSI here. Tire grip is, oh wait, 90s. I usually run 90s. And then tire profile, I guess I could do 30 up front and then do like 40 in the back. I said I wasn't running staggered, and here I am running staggered. I'm stupid. I feel like I'm gonna get nasty wheel bite on that. Yeah. Should probably just stick to the 35s, keep it at 260. Unless I go down to like 17s. That'd be weird, but kinda cool. No. We're gonna keep it there. Let's fix the suspension though. The suspension. Why the hell am I running positive camber on the fucking back? What the hell am I thinking? What's going on there? Hold up, Ivy. Too much dip on your chip there, buddy. We're gonna go... I said camber and I was talking about toe, but like the camber is actually kind of atrocious. I usually keep it at like a 150. But like close to it. In the back. For most of our cars that I drift. And then I really like to keep this angle close to the fender, but just enough to where I know that it's, when I'm turning, it's not gonna bite. So I could swang that motherfucker. Okay, and then we're gonna come here. Actually, let's bring the toe back in, because that's gonna give me a lot of speed coming around corners, like with higher toe. And I kind of want to be able to slow it down a little bit when I need to. Especially with the fact that I'm talking about like clutch kicking and using that as like the anti-lag, pretty much. Ackerman angle is decent because it's a really small car, and then max steering angle should definitely be higher for that Ackerman angle. That's usually the reason. This is the main reason as to why it was having that really shallow angle when I was drifting. So this is going to give it much better, like with the Ackerman angle, because the Ackerman angle is high, and this needs to be higher. Okay, and then spring length. We'll fix that after. You never want to fix a spring length until you finish fixing your sway bar stiffness and your spring stiffness and all this down here. Your spring length is always going to come last. Like, you should not touch that at all until you get these dialed in. Like realistically. Well, these four specifically: spring stiffness, front and back, and then your sway bar stiffness, front and back. You never want to touch these until last. What I like to do is I like to have, like on shorter base cars, I like to have my spring stiffness really stiff up front. And then I like a looser rear end, because I like to be able to feel, like, especially like even if there's bumps and whatnot, and I usually set up like the damp and everything to be a little better to be able to handle it. But I like to have a looser end, basically, that'll be able to handle like all the shocks and all that. Yada yada. Oh my god. Let me reset this. I didn't mean to touch that. So what the fuck is going on? I did not mean to do that. Stop it. Stick drift, it's crazy. Trying to see it. Yeah, my bad. I'm like dragging, but yeah. With this, it's just personal preference. Like I said, I like to have a looser end than like a softer uh, rear. That sounds crazy, no Diddy. You know what I mean. And then you can usually just keep the front here, good. But here you want to keep it. Well, you want the sway bar stiffness. I keep mine always opposite of what the spring stiffness is. So if my spring stiffness is high, I'll keep my sway bar stiffness low. If my spring stiffness is low, I'll keep my spring stiffness high. With this though, since it's at like 155, like right kind of smack dab in the middle of everything, of like the whole slider, I could usually keep it like somewhere around like the 60s or like the 50s. And that usually keeps it pretty stable. And then with the rear axis, I'll usually bust that up a little bit higher. Oh, I mean, oh, that's whatever. I'll reset that, but but I do like to keep these opposite of each other as well. So opposite of these, but also opposite of each other. And that usually translates pretty well into a very stable and fun ride around the track. And then we'll go high solar stiffness. We'll go like 117. And for this, we're gonna damper, fasten, bump. Okay, so for this, I'm gonna bump that up by like 100. I'm gonna bump that up to like 4,200, and then I'm gonna go up with this a little more, and then keep that right there. And then this, see how it's like lifted, and how I said don't touch this until the end. You see where it's at? You see how it's like high as hell up off the ground? And you're obviously gonna want your fitment to look nice too. And just butt that down. I mean, it's functional fitment, but like, you just bring that down to wherever you feel like seats the best for your fitment likings. I like functional fitment, so I'm gonna keep that like around the 11 mark, just so that way I'm not getting too much rubbing on the wheel wheels or anything like that. If anything, I need to increase the camber on the back, because you see that? You see how it's like through? You see how it's through the car? Yeah, like that's not what you want, obviously. You don't want that. So you're gonna want, see where it's like bouncing at? And keep testing it to make sure. I'm gonna also just see where it starts clipping. Just that way you know, like, for sure, like, oh yeah, like, that's definitely clipping there. Where does it start clipping at? Still clipping, still clipping, still clipping, still clipping, still clipping. Okay, so it's clipping, like, all the way up until, like, a 10.5. Or, like, a 10.3. So I'm gonna set it a little bit higher, like 11 or like a 12. Yeah, like a 12.3. That's 12.7. That looks kind of nice. We'll bring it down a little bit lower. Yeah, 12.3. 12.2. And then we'll bring this down up here because it's looking a little whack. It could come down a lot farther than the other one. Obviously, you want to make sure your front bumper is not scraping the ground, so you're not hitting them. I mean, unless you like that kind of fitment, unless you, like, to each their own. These are wide body front fenders, so I can kind of get away with that. Plus the camber is pretty nasty on the front, so it should be decent. Might have to change the, what's it called? Caster. That's what I was thinking. And the steering axis, just that way it returns. Maybe even a kingpin, possibly. I might have to pull her back a little. I'll put her at a 9. And then I don't want it too twitchy, so I'll bring this down to like an 8.6. I would explain this, but you could do your research on it. From the, oh, that's clipping nasty. Hang on, what the hell? Zesty as fuck. Okay, we'll keep her. We'll keep her right here. Okay, like, maybe 10.7, 10.7, 10.7. We'll keep her at a 10.7. That looks nice. I like that. Maybe even a 12.1 over here. And then, okay, so my camber is no longer at a 4. We're gonna bust that back to like a 3. Or keep it like there. Just don't want it clipping. Okay, now my rear axis is also not the same either, so we're gonna put her back at a 1.5. And then we're going to fix this. Okay. Now we can get back to testing. For real. For real, for real. See what I'm talking about? This. Alright, let's say easy touches in there. See, I left it like really quick. And then I just all the power in the world. Usually I should have done Okay, so I'm still having trouble with coming around the corner. I think I can bump this up a little. See what goes on with that, and then also we're gonna bump this up a little bit higher. I feel we could bump this up to like a 57. And then with the power lock, I feel like we could go back. This starts at a 60. I feel like we could low-key keep it at like a 64. Somewhere. Hang on. Okay, so I need a little more stability from you. And we're gonna go to 3.5. And then I also need some bullshit now. I also need I need to drop this a little more. Maybe like a 62. Maybe it's a preload that I have on it. Let me bump that up to a 500. See what's going on with that. This is what we use for. I just realized I don't have anything. Equipped to those buttons. Hang on. What? Okay, it's just weird. Oh, race stats. Why is there no bind for neutral? That's so weird. I just realized. Look at this. Left, right, accelerator, handbrake, flashers, next camera, previous camera, rear view, restart track, restore car, next gear, previous gear, gear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, reverse. There's no neutral. Why can I not bind a button to neutral? And why have I never thought of this? They think clutch is just neutral? Fuck you. I guess, but why do they do this? Like, clutch is just clutch. Like, I don't want to have to shift all the way down to neutral. That's stupid. I was gonna say I could just like bind a gear to like 1 and then shift down into neutral. I don't fucking know. No, actually, I'm just gonna bind a gear to three. Because I feel like most of the time you need to skip down to 3rd gear and having to literally fish, like, row through the gears is ridiculous when you could just pop that motherfucker into 3rd. So, yeah. Okay. Cool. Cool. Wait, is there one for up on the D-pad too? I don't think I saw a bind for up. No, there is no bind for up. The fuck? Okay. Should I do, I guess, reverse for up? What's right trigger doing? Nothing. Oh, this is amazing. This gives me a reason to, like... Okay, I should bind up to gear 3. Because I can drive like this. I don't need to use the camera the whole time. Like, hardly using the camera. I'm holding these, like, triangle all that up here. I have the 2 back buttons. keep my hand on the steering at all times, so I only want to be able to do this. These two, yeah, I'd have to switch it and learn to use this. Okay. Okay, I understand it now. This is gonna be gear 3. It's up, or it's down. And this is gonna be gear 5. Or I could do reverse. Low key. Maybe even just keep it as reverse. Whoa, 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 whoa. Reverse could be that, cause like I'll never accidentally click that, and then I can make this like gear 2. But then I'll have to fish for higher gears. I feel like if I just keep it between 2 and 3, like, or 3 and 4, so like this, and then this. So that way the only gears I have to actually fish for, and each one is only one away, and the farthest one, which in most of my cars don't even really need 6 gear, very few of them do. The only time I'd actually have to like fish for a gear is 6. Because then it's just, you know, bam, second. If I need to drop down to first, you know, like if I'm slowing down or something, coming to a stop, just bam, second, and then drop to first with L1, R1, and then if I want to go to third, I could go bam, second, up to third, or I could go bam, fourth, down the third. You know, it's not like too much of a fishing, it's just like a quick button press, double button, concise button press, I should say. And then, like I said, the only time I actually have to fish for like a 5th gear, well, I'm not even fishing for 5th gear, because it's bam, 4th, up to 5th. The only time I'm fishing for a gear is 6th or 7th. So, and there's very few cars that have 7, so it's, yeah. need to redo this then. Because down was what, third? And then up was... No, down was fourth. Sorry, I'm reconfiguring my back buttons. And then up was fourth. Or third. Third. Yeah. Damn it, I keep scrolling past the button. Okay. And I lock them in. Cool. Nice. Now go back to dyno stand. Take this fucking preload off. What's the preload setting for the FRS actually? I didn't even get that. It's probably why it's terrible. Okay, so the buttons that I mapped don't even work. It's just, I have to hold it. It's ridiculous, right? This game. Okay. Okay. It's on controller. Why? Like, why is it a hold and not a press? What the hell is that mapping? That's lame. Means I gotta delete all those. I can't map them unless I'm like physically holding the button. It's not just like a press and I stay in that gear. That sucks. That really sucks. Okay, now that I have the tune down, I kind of want to just like mess around. Um, yeah, I'm gonna go test this on a drag map and see what's up with that. Cause it sounds kind of cool. I'm not gonna lie. It sounds kind of sick. High key, I'm thinking. Red ring, okay. Or even Milton Drive.